Well, this is going to be a fun discussion. This is a Things Hidden discussion with someone who is also a podcast host, and he's a historian, and he's got quite a following online. His website is ThaddeusRussell.com, and he's the host of Unregistered, the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I wanted to have you on. You get into kind of an adjacent theme of this program, which is, we titled the podcast "Things Hidden," which is a reference to, the passage in the Bible that Jesus says, "I've come to reveal things hidden since the foundation of the world," and taking a Rene Girard spin on that interpretation, we kind of see that which is hidden since the foundation of the world. The word "world" there is more of a social world or cultural world, and that which is hidden is the way in which we bury our victims and deify our victims, right? And I see what you kind of do with your work is you're looking for the renegades, the misfits, which is in the domain of the scapegoat. So I think we're in adjacent categories in some of the things we're looking at here.
Okay. Well, the renegades in my book, I'm not sure. I mean, they have been used as scapegoats, but that's not what's important about them to me. What's important about them to me is that they violated social norms of their time, and in doing so enlarged sort of the sphere of what is possible. So, for instance, prostitutes in the 19th century, right? I read about them a lot. They did a lot of things, obviously, that women were not supposed to do. And in doing so, they earned a lot of money, which also women weren't supposed to do. And from that, of course, they gained a lot of power, economic and political power, and enlarged freedom for women in all sorts of ways, which we can talk about. They were certainly scapegoated and derided and despised. But to me, what's important about them is not so much that they were victims in that way or exploited in that way, but that they, by simply breaking rules, made new things possible that we all now take for granted.
And you in your search, do you focus mostly on American history and that telling of the underdog and these misfits? Yeah.
Yeah, that's my book.
Right.
It's a Renegade History of the United States. So that's the argument throughout. It's a full survey of U.S. history, but with my particular angle on it, and with that argument at the center of it.
Can you tell people a little bit about your background in academia and what you studied and how it got you to write this book?
Sure. I went to Columbia University for my PhD in U.S. history. I was there in the 90s. And after that, during that time, I became a labor historian. I wrote the history of labor unions. That was my first book on Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters. And I became sort of interested in the fact that discourse generally in academia, but especially in history, and especially in labor history, is and has been for a long time dominated entirely by left-wing ideas, and I was a member of the left at the time, and I still have many left-wing ideas, but just simply that monopoly on ideas was really troubling for me, even though I was a member of that church, right? And so that's why I chose to look at Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters, because they were the right-wing unions. They were the biggest right-wing union, and they were totally ignored because of that. So I just thought, well, hey, this is obviously much of America. Most Americans are not left-wing, nor have they ever been. And so let's look at them. And I just found a lot of things about working class Americans, really, the middle of the 20th century, that was at odds with the way that I was being taught from left-wing historians. So, I mean, one is that they were very interested in improving their living conditions and getting higher wages and better working conditions at the job, but they weren't interested in managing their company, taking control of it, seizing the means of production, having a socialist revolution, governing, managing society, all these things that my socialist parents had told me that the working class would want and benefit from. And that got me that began my estrangement from the academy. It was a mutual parting of ways. They didn't like what I was saying, and I certainly didn't like what I was being asked to say. And but anyway, I did get a job after I finished my PhD at Columbia, teaching at Barnard College, which is the women's college there. It's part of Columbia. And I taught there for 5 years, and I developed the ideas that became A Renegade History of the United States in my lectures on U.S. history. This is before they really knew what I was doing. They didn't like, once they found out about it, the arguments, the one that I made and others in that book. And I essentially was fired, not technically, but I was essentially fired from my job there. I had been teaching full time there, running the American Studies program for 5 years. And I had to sort of do an audition, a job talk for a tenure track position, and they denied it. And based on lots of things, but much of what they said was the ideas that I was presenting here were improper and dangerous and did not belong in the academy. So instead of continuing that quest to become a tenured professor, I wrote the book and have been making it as a public intellectual, they call us, for about 12 years now. And what I did was 4 years ago, I founded Renegade University, which is my alternative university, which is a combination of online learning and in-person events. And we've built a real community too. We have 1,000 members now. We just crossed that mark last month. And we have a big event coming up in Texas in October. People coming from all over the world actually to our events and taking our courses. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to pay instructors better than Harvard pays their instructors, and to charge less for classes than Harvard does, certainly. And to be able to say, most importantly, what we want to say. There's perfect freedom of thought and academic freedom at Renegade University. The only thing we don't allow is ad hominem attacks, but any idea on its own is welcome for discussion at RU. And people really, it's the reason we've done so well so far is that people really respond to that because they need it, because our discourse in public is so restricted, and increasingly so with all the censorship that's coming down via tech companies, but from the government ultimately. So it's been an instructive moment for me founding Renegade University, but it's also been life-changing for me and a lot of other people who are members there, because we found this space in which we feel truly free. And we're all very curious people. And so we're able to really just flow outward into the realm of ideas without any of the restraints that are placed on us in places like colleges and universities. So that's my story.
What are some of the courses that you guys focus on there, the range of courses?
We do a lot of philosophy. We have about 5 or 6 philosophy courses right now. Nietzsche, one on postmodernism that I teach, one on critical race theory, critical theory with James Lindsay that I co-taught with him. We do a lot of history also, as I teach U.S. history, but we've had courses on African-American history, a lot of foreign policy. We've had Scott Horton teach foreign policy courses for us, the war on terror, the war on Afghanistan. And we have courses on sex work and sexual diversity. And what else we got? Lots of stuff. Oh, a course on the history of conservatism. I'm also by Daniel McCarthy. I'm also teaching a course on the history of the American left currently. So a lot of different things, but we're adding more and more courses all the time. By the end of this year, we'll probably have a catalog of about 50 that people can purchase. And then we have webinars that are live that people can take, symmetrically with us. So it's really exciting. It's taking off.
Why is it that I interview mostly ex-professors who have online gigs? I guess that's the new thing now, isn't it? My goodness.
Well, I mean, that means you're probably interviewing people who had free ideas, free minds. Yeah, because that is not allowed. It's simply not allowed.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, it's, any institution protects itself, right? Or the heads of institutions, the leaders of institutions, they must protect themselves, right? They must protect their power. So until the 1960s, what we would call conservatives dominated the universities. And of course, that's when they wouldn't allow communists in, right? And they wouldn't allow, socialists in, and they wouldn't allow lefties of all. So they held this monopoly on power. So they would only give tenure, they'd only give jobs and tenure to their friends, political friends. And then when the left took over beginning in the 1960s, they just reversed it and said, okay, you know what? We're not going to allow conservatives in here anymore, because this is our last bastion. The left, for a long time, that was the only power they had in society. They didn't yet control the media, and they didn't yet control the Democratic Party, which they do now. But for many decades, all they had was the colleges and universities. And people have talked about the long march through the institutions, and that's where it began. This was a deliberate strategy by a lot of people to leave the protesting in the streets and become professors, so that they could influence American culture by training the youth, which they did. And now we're reaping the benefits of that with people like AOC and Ilhan Omar, and for better or worse, but that's who they are. That's where they come from. They come from those liberal colleges, and they now run the New York Times, and they now run the Washington Post, and they now run CNN, and they run a big wing of the Democratic Party.
But you look at the like Glenn Greenwald type liberal and so forth. I mean, that was the dominant flavor of leftism, as recently as like the late 2006 and 7 and 8 and all that. I mean, they were, well, I guess 2008 they tampered that down a bit, but it wasn't very long ago that they were very big into free speech and critical of giant corporations and just wildly, unabashedly defensive of free speech and bodily autonomy. All these things they've thrown away so fast. Why? Is it Trump? Yeah. That's the easy answer people go to. But what really is underneath this turn towards illiberal leftism that's so powerful and monolithic?
Yeah, great question. It's the rise of Trump. So Trump was an existential crisis for them, meaning he threatened the very basis of the post-war liberal order, right? He was the first presidential candidate really to call into question the existence of NATO, to call into question the existence of regime change wars like Iraq, Afghanistan, nation building, imperialism. He didn't overthrow it, but he said throughout, he wasn't so sure about this whole project, which is the liberals built. This is the thing that people think it's a Republican thing, militarism and all the bases around the world, the American empire. No, it's Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, John F. Kennedy, and Lyndon Baines Johnson built the damn thing. And then the Republicans ever since then have just been maintaining it. But so Trump came along and said, hey, I don't know if we should be doing this kind of thing. We shouldn't be having wars to try to change people's minds about democracy. Look what happened in Afghanistan, he said famously over and over again. It's impossible. So the foreign policy establishment, which really runs Washington, that's where most of the money is, right? That's where most of the power is. They said, no way, Jose. So the CIA and the FBI conspired to try to bring him down. I mean, and that's why, because he was a threat to their very existence. And then, the people in Congress who believed that we should have an American empire, it was an existential threat to them as well, because that's what everything rests on, is the American empire, right? And, and so that's why they stoked the flames with Trump for 4 solid years and did all sorts of rule breaking to get him out of there, because he said, we can't have this anymore. So they said we can't have speech in that case. If you're going to be calling into question the American empire, which has been the United States since its founding, it's been an empire since its founding, since before its founding in a way. We're not going to allow you to talk, meaning that those in power, when they're very comfortable, love freedom of speech, David, right? When they're threatened in a serious way like this, not just one party versus another, but this Trump is like he's basically attempting to overthrow the whole system, right? Certainly the political party system. The establishment Republicans and establishment Democrats they're being overturned by this. They're not going to allow it. The regimes who are vulnerable don't like freedom of speech, of course, just naturally.
So all this is a sign, in your estimation, that they're waning in power rather than about to go big and bold for a long time, that this is a sign that they're very weak.
I think so. I mean, there's the Trump wing of the Republican Party, which is clearly taking over the party. I mean, no one cares about the establishment Republicans anymore. So the MAGA movement, which I'm following really closely, it's growing steadily, and basically without Trump, it's really a grassroots movement now. I mean, and I have massive disagreements with it. I disagree with at least half of their policies, but it's undeniable that they're here to stay. And we're talking about 60 to 70 million people, right? Who are, and many of them are very passionate. So the Republican Party is about to be seized by that wing, which is anti-establishment. And then the Democrats are also split between the Bernie people, the Bernie wing, the AOC wing, and the old Biden establishment wing. And the Biden establishment wing, like, no one cares about Joe Biden at all. There's no Democrat who gives a shit about Joe Biden. And no, they don't care about the rest of that old corrupt geriatric class, Nancy Pelosi. No one's passionate about those people. They're passionate about the Bernie wing. The Bernie wing is also very likely to take over. So yes, the old guard is on its way out, I believe. I just don't see any base of support for it anymore. And then with the media, sure, New York Times and CNN are really powerful, but new media, like what you and I are doing right now, we are one speck in, or one drop in this ocean of millions and millions and millions of new alternative media outlets, right? So the whole media establishment is also facing an existential threat. I mean, it's really already dead in a way. People under 40 don't read the New York Times or watch CNN. They do stuff like this. They watch podcasts, they watch YouTube videos. And so, yeah, I think the old order is on its way out, or already on the way out. And it's just a question of what will replace it.
How much of this battle that we're going to see unfold in the 21st century, the first half of the 21st century at least, do you think will be defined by the public health, coercion versus public health liberty? How much of that is going to dominate? It's shaping up to be the big elephant in the room so far.
It's terrifying. I mean, this is the most disturbing thing that's happened in my lifetime politically. And wars, I suppose, are more disturbing, but in a sense, since they didn't touch the United States, right? No one living inside the United States experienced war in my lifetime, and really not since the Civil War. This is definitely the most disturbing thing that's actually been in my life politically, because it's all around, it's pervasive, it's ubiquitous, it is authoritarian. I would say it's totalitarian. You have people snitching on each other. I mean, spying, shaming, all sorts of coercion by neighbors and friends and family members. I mean, I've known people, many very close to me, who have been threatened with expulsion from their family because they wouldn't get vaccinated. And now you have apartheid basically in New York City, where, you can't get into a restaurant, you can't eat in public without a vaccine passport, and only 28% of Black New Yorkers are vaccinated. So what does it look like? It looks like Jim Crow, you guys. You liberals, you big liberals in New York, look what you just did. And do Black people have reason to not want to put an experimental drug in their arm? Tuskegee, anybody? And Tuskegee is just the least of it. It's an experimental drug. I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I got the vaccine, but I was going to wait to see if it was effective and not dangerous. And I'm still not sure, but to force people to take an experimental drug is just ridiculous to me. And then to force it into children, and to mask children who aren't vulnerable to this thing for the benefit of boomers. It's so pathetic and disgusting and disheartening.
And how is that? I mean, I know we could play with the words there, but because you have the rise of the public health framework in the early 20th century by some of these tycoons and robber barons, as they call them, that developed this whole framework that we still have in place. So they were called the progressives, I guess. But to me, it feels more of a fundamentally right-wing thing to try to delineate life between the clean and the unclean. That's typically a right-wing thing to be like,
yeah, right.
You're pure, you're impure, or a religious thing. You're unclean, so you're outside the camp, and we're the clean. How did this get into the mind of the left, who've been telling us so long, my body, my choice, as one of their pillars, and the other one is be very, very skeptical of corporate alliance with government? I mean, I just don't understand how this swept in, because I get the Trump thing, but I mean, their minds were really primed to grab a hold of this little framework and really die hard, get on board with it.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, I was born into the left, and I was in the left until my mid-30s, very firmly. I mean, I was an activist for the Democratic Socialists of America. I've studied the history of the left. I'm teaching about the history of the American left right now. So this is the question I've been wrestling with since the beginning of the pandemic. So what is it about leftists and liberals that makes them love wearing masks and love the vaccine? Again, let me just step back and let's explain like what's happening here. So an experimental drug that was rushed to production under the Trump administration by big pharma. That's what the left wants us to do.
With legal immunity, right?
Yeah. It's incredible to me that that's a left-wing cause, right? Well, all right. So, I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I can't prove it, but here's, I think there's many reasons why people on the left are prone to loving lockdowns and vaccines and masking. One is the obvious virtue signaling. That's the mark of a good person, of course, because we are told that bad people, Republicans, Republicans don't care about other people, so that's why they don't put their masks on. So that's number one. And that kind of shaming, I think, is what is doing most of the police work here. I think that's doing most of that work, because you can sort of see, right, when people like have their mask below their nose, or they like think that you, by sitting down at a restaurant, you no longer can transmit the virus. They're obviously not, they obviously don't believe their own propaganda about this. So there's the virtue signaling, which, and I live in the Bay Area, Berkeley, basically, it's like full of lefties. And so like everybody wears masks, and, there's lots of shaming going on. There's also, the central principle of every left-wing movement since the French Revolution has been equality, egalitarianism. Well, putting a mask on so that everybody looks essentially the same, that's egalitarian. I mean, that's why they don't mind it as much as people like I do. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's something people haven't taken into account, but yeah, they like that. And it's egalitarian. We're more equal now. Everybody looks the same. We all look like a damn face mask. Then there's the hypochondria, and that shouldn't be underestimated. It's clearly they're more afraid of this thing than most of us are. And that's a little harder to understand, except that the left-wing media has been stoking the fear of the virus, way beyond what's proportionate. So I guess that's it. They just only consume left-wing media, or they mostly do. And they see that number, the death number, every day on the Chiron, on CNN or New York Times, or all of them, and that's liberal and left media too, talking about it like it's the Black Plague, ignoring the fact that it basically is harmless for people who are, not in the vulnerable groups. I mean, it's just absurd what's going on here. So, and today I just looked at the numbers. I'm in Alameda County, which is a very large county. Several million people live here. I looked at the deaths with COVID, and it's basically zero for the last month. Yet we have a mask mandate. I can't, my boxing gym, we have to wear masks. I mean, at the grocery store, it's ridiculous. So they love that though. They love their masks here. And I think it's the virtue signaling. I think it's the uniformity, the conformity, the egalitarianism of that, the awful egalitarianism of it. And I think that they're being fed by the media. Also government becomes the savior. That's another reason they like it. Right. So that's the vaccine had to come from the government. They don't talk about how it's they don't celebrate about Pfizer and Johnson and Moderna. They celebrate about the FDA, now's the FDA is the big hero for authorizing finally the Pfizer. But it's all a government initiative. They see it as, and they just love their government here. They love them some government. So those are many of the reasons. Also, and then the bigger, scarier reason, and I don't think there's a conspiracy, but I think this is now, they've realized it as an opportunity. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there was a great reset conspiracy, but I do think that this is an opportunity, just like climate change, and this is getting to your question, right? To reorganize our society. Right. So we now have means to track people, track their biology now, their medical history, and the left, and particularly progressives, that's their name of their game, since the turn of the 20th century. They've always been about categorizing, classifying, ordering people, managing. Social engineering is the word. That's a progressive term. Social engineering. It's easier to engineer human beings if you have their medical record in a database, right? So, and this is something Foucault taught us about. This is very Foucauldian. Yeah, and certainly a lot of this will persist after the pandemic. And it's just going to be yet another fight about how much we allow, how much of a Patriot Act will there be, following on this, like the consequences of the Iraq War were the Patriot Act and things like that, right? Increased surveillance, central control of our lives. And here's another opportunity for those who they actually think it's good for the central government to control our lives more. I mean, that's just that in itself. They believe that's a good thing. They just want the central government in DC to control my life and your life more closely. That's just a fact. That's what they want. So they're getting that. They're getting that from this. So that's 4 reasons, I guess.
A lot of those things are wrapped up in what we would look at, as transcendence, as a kind of religion, and that's become popular to describe the woke side of the left as religious. But I would argue that the state itself is a vestige of sacrificial religions and gods. Yeah. We replace by the power of Thor, by the power of FDA, or by the power of the will of the people, or the general welfare, or the public good, or public health, or the science. Those are just the kind of evolution, the vestiges of these big others, as Zizek might call it. These big others that bind us into our sense of comfort and so forth, in our beliefs, right?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Well, the state became the new God, of course. That's modernity, isn't it? Isn't that how you read it? I mean, to me, that's how I read it. Under modernity, people like the progressives, not just the progressives, but especially the progressives. They replaced God with the nation state, and that became what we worship. That's what we sacrificed our bodies, right? Paul says, sacrifice your body for God in Romans, right? Now they say sacrifice your body for the nation state, right? And look what we got under modernity, right? The worst killing machines ever in human history.
Yeah, and it's almost like there's a narrative, a myth that must be protected, which is we have the power to control nature, just like we can control the planet through social engineering. We can control viruses, and when that narrative is threatened, because it's not in control, it's still coming back after all this time, they have to scapegoat. Well, somebody sinned in the camp, somebody profaned the rituals that we were doing, and they must be punished, and they must have pain. And that's why there's glee, unfortunately, when people who are unvaccinated get sick, and sometimes there's there's talk about exclude them from getting groceries. I mean, we have no place to be condemning any of these more older-fashioned religions and superstitions.
I agree. I completely agree. I see nothing but religious thinking out there. At least with religious folk, right? They know that it's religious thinking, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? I think there's nothing wrong with it at all. But it's no worse, certainly, than what you hear, in the media these days. Left-wing politics has always had a religious cast to it, and really, I have said a Christian cast to it. I believe the American left-wing politics is fundamentally Christian. Actually, they just replaced God with the state, but the whole moral code, the moral structure, is essentially the same, in my view. Right? Yeah. So again, sacrificing yourself, your body, your individuality, your freedom, your pleasures for this thing that's now the community or the nation state instead of God. Right.
Well, you've got pieces of, it's kind of all mixed in, but you've got like the right has the metaphysics of Christianity, like we believe in God and these things like that, and the left has the aesthetic and the ethics of Christianity more closely imitated.
Yes, totally agree with that. Yeah, that's cool to hear someone.
Now
say
the
that.
question is, what about the individual part? Because Christianity was really big about promoting the human person as not fodder for the crowd. Do you see that as which team? I mean, it's not really important, but which team do you think kind of takes that up today? Because the right is all about individual liberty and my right and my individual liberty nowadays, but that's also a classical liberal thing that's still in the left when needed, especially for sexual matters. The left is very good about individualism when it comes to sexual identity and so forth. Right?
No, sir, I disagree with that totally. No. The left is super puritanical when it comes to sex. Right. The whole war against pornography in the 1970s and 80s, that was feminists and Jesse Helms and right-wing Christians like joining together, realizing that they had this common cause. No, they're really puritanical. They're but I was a bit your interpretation.
I guess I meant more gender identity stuff. Like it's like my unique.
Oh, gender. Yeah, but that's not about sex, right? So you also notice like gay men stopped being sexual as soon as they got marriage, right? As soon as the big liberal cause was to get married. Right. And that meant becoming very upright and good soldiers, good citizens, in the Republic. Right. To show that we're not sex fiends. Right. So that the whole, which to me is a huge loss, actually, because sexual liberation is important to me. And to me, gays have always been at the vanguard of that. So but yeah, no, the trans thing is not about sex. That's about this weird narcissistic identity formation. And then like insisting that, and it's about control. It's about forcing other people to see the world the way that we do. Even though I'm fundamentally okay with trans as a thing, I think it's a social construct. I think gender is a social construct, but they've obviously taken it way past that to basically be the power play. I think, it's like, look, I'm going to force you to see the world the way that I see it, even though it's radically at odds with the way that you see it. It's going to force you to work. Also, you're going to have to work hard to remember my pronoun. Right. And I'm going to police you too. So then if you ever use the wrong pronoun, you're going to pay for it. You're going to be punished for it. I mean, it's a little tiny Maoist struggle session, in each one of these encounters with a trans person like that. I mean, there are many trans people who are wonderful and don't do that stuff, but the thrust of the politics of this movement that we've seen over the last few years has been puritanical in that way, right? That resembles a Puritan colony too, right? Where everybody's policing each other and everybody's like making sure you say all the right things in the right ways. So I think Puritanism has been a dominant strain in American culture since the beginning, and it shows up in places it's not supposed to, like in left-wing movements, like, the trans thing, and like all through left-wing movements, you see that kind of stuff. Good old Calvinism rearing its head again and again.
The pipeline from Calvinism to transgenderism.
Yeah, totally. It's very much, it's also predestination, right? Speaking of Calvinism, right? I was born this way, right? It's not even gender no longer is a social construct with them because they biologize it, they essentialize it. Isn't it funny, right? They say, no, I was born, whatever X gender they want to be, right? That's the whole point of the trans movement. The intellectual basis was people like Foucault saying, no, you can be whatever gender you want because it's all made up. There's nothing determined in your biology about this stuff, like whether you're going to want to wear a dress or like Tonka trucks. That was the whole point of it. And now they're sounding like Christian conservatives, right? Now they're like, I was born a particular way, I was born this gender. It's like, wait a minute, people. And then they police it. Then they police those very boundaries. It's wild. It's like anti-postmodern, anti-Foucauldian.
So where is it going? It has a direction.
Well, see, I don't know if it does. I mean, this is the only hope I have. I don't see a lot of direction. It's not, and there's a lot of splits, I mean, the good old socialist left is really having a hard time getting its message across, still always has. And it's very different than the new identitarian left, the new woke left, right? Very different. They have very different agendas. They're sympathetic to one another, but the people who get really wound up about race and stuff, they don't think about like the Green New Deal that much. They don't think about like infrastructure bills. They don't care. It's not their thing. They want to inflict punishment. It's a sadistic movement, in my view, the identity politics movement. Where's it going? So, the Bernie people who are, the social democrats, basically, and then the woke people who are just like screaming at us about our identities. They're not actually necessarily allied, and they're not going to help each other with their agendas because the social democrats need a class analysis, right? That it's based on a class analysis. They, it's all about economics to them. Economics is the most important thing to them, just like libertarians, right? Marxists think that economics is the most important thing. So to convince people to pass a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill that will employ lots of people by the government directly, they've got to make the case that, this is really important because economics is important. And that's not getting across because Americans are very shallow on politics and they love surface appearances like identity. So that's why identity is the most popular form of politics in American culture. That's why Hollywood loves it. That's why it's all over every website and every corporation. And so then identity politics goes nowhere. There's no end game there. I mean, maybe reparations would be the one concrete demand I've heard, but it's just about this endless struggle session. You're white, you're straight, you're a man, therefore this, therefore that. I'm black, I'm woman, I'm trans, whatever it is, and therefore this, that, and the other thing. It's a sadomasochistic movement, and with no agenda particularly except to constantly inflict pain. So that's the good news. I think it's going to burn out. I think the identity politics cannot be sustained forever. There will always be remnants of it, always, 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 because there will always be the history of slavery and the history of segregation for them to appeal to over and over again. But yeah, they're not trying to build anything. Thank God. There's no institution building going on. They've already seized the institution, the universities, but those too are eroding because of stuff like Renegade University, and podcasts just like yours and all of this. Universities are becoming less and less relevant. Thank God. So right now they still control the discourse, the culture, but that's going to fade. That's going to fade for sure. More and more people. And the ones who are
pushing these things, to be frank, they don't have a lot of kids. They rely on converting other people's kids to propagate their ideas into the future. So if they keep this up, they're going to be in a real big cul-de-sac pretty soon here, dead end.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, the population.
You keep building your universities and stuff like that, like you're doing, and they keep not having kids. Eventually, the numbers don't connect. You know what I mean? And you look at. I want to ask you. This kind of ties in a little bit with what we're going here, but about your perspective on what's going on with the recall of Newsome. There, you're in California. Good. You're in the heart. You're in the mecca of leftism in California, I guess.
Yeah.
In that region. So Larry Elder could really be the governor. I mean, it's almost like a satire or something, but Larry Elder, who's this talk radio host, conservative with some libertarian positions, firebrand, Reagan loving guy, out of nowhere. And he's got like 50% of Hispanics saying they like him or they don't like Newsome. And I'm like, this is interesting because regardless of what you think about his policies, the fact that I was always assuming California was going to be a one-party state for the duration of its life. But the fact that someone like that could just out of nowhere have some real strong opportunity is a sign of hope that maybe people are going to say enough, especially if minority communities keep saying, we don't want this stuff,
Southern California is a Latino state. Just look at the numbers. And certainly LA County that's a Latino place. That's not, there's white people still dominate the power structures, but that's changing all the time. And just numerically, Latinos, it's a Latino place. And Northern California is about to be there. I mean, it's now like a half Latino place. Where I live is there's 1/3 white, 1/3 Latino immigrant, and 1/3 Black right here in Oakland. And Latinos, there's barrios just taking over the old neighborhood, the old ghettos in Oakland. So, and Latinos are very conservative in a lot of ways. We know this, in general, they are on so-called social issues, cultural issues, and they're immigrants. They're strivers, they're hustlers, they're independent entrepreneurs often, right? And so who likes free market policies? Entrepreneurs like that, hustlers like that. And it's and then also once they're here, it's called the pulling up the ladder syndrome. The immigrants who arrive tend not to be so sympathetic about letting new immigrants come in. Why challenge? Because they've already got the jobs. They don't want more competition. They got the gardening job. They don't want to have more gardeners coming in. So they tend to be fine with Trump-like immigration restriction policies. It's kind of ironic, but it's just true. You can look at the numbers. And so that's why it's not surprising that he got what it was like a quarter of the Latino vote in the last election. And in some areas that are like overwhelmingly Latino, he won the vote.
Yeah, some of the border town states and cities in Texas were majority
and
Trump,
Hispanic. Rio Grande Valley, Grande Valley, the most Mexican part of America. He took many of those counties, I think, overall. Yeah. So that's California. Thank God. I mean, that it's a threat to the establishment. The Democratic Party in California is as corrupt as the day is long. I mean, we're talking about Adam Schiff here. The guy who ran the Russiagate hoax for 4 years and still is insisting that Russia somehow took control of the country. We have Nancy Pelosi, who's about 155 years old and has been a career politician since she was a teenager, basically, and is just, if you just look at her voting record, and Dianne Feinstein, look at their voting records over the last 50 years, basically, and it's just like they just go whichever the way the wind blows. They don't care about anything in any fundamental way. They're willing to sell out anybody at any time to maintain their power, and Gavin Newsome, my goodness gracious. So the story about Gavin Newsome, I wrote an article about him for Pluto News. It was a lot of fun to research because it turns out that Gavin Newsome, his entire public career was funded by the Gordon Getty estate, Getty Oil, one of the original big oil companies in the United States of America. I thought oil companies were not looked, fondly upon by the left, but apparently that's fine. So Gordon Getty, which is like he's one of the descendants of J. Paul Getty, the original founder. He's just a billionaire. He's a local billionaire. He lives in San Francisco. He liked Gavin Newsome when he was a kid and started giving him money to run political campaigns and to start businesses. So like Gavin has this whole huge wine business that's like an empire in California called Plump Jack Wines, totally funded by the Gettys. He ran for board of supervisors, funded by the Gettys, mayor funded by the Gettys, governor funded by the Gettys, houses, mansions in Sacramento, the capital, and in Marin County here, both funded by the Gettys. His extravagant wedding that was held in Marin County, funded by the Gettys. The kid, and he was a mediocre student, went to Santa Clara University on a baseball scholarship, washed out as a baseball player, got out of college, had nothing to do. Getty said, here's some money, form a business, and then a year later we'll have you run for board of supervisors. Boom. He's a kid. He's my age, but he's a kid. I mean, come on, meaning he has nothing to him. And, his handling of COVID, I mean, we have the same number of deaths as Florida. Do I need to say anything more? Yet we've had lockdown after lockdown. We had the first lockdown and the last lockdown and more lockdowns in between than any other place in the country. We now have a mask mandate, as I said, inside in any indoor public space. You have to wear a mask today. And we've had no deaths from COVID in a month, David. So talk about religious thinking. I mean, give me a Pentecostal church over this place any day of the week for free thought and scientific rigor.
So are you feeling like an energy change is happening locally, even in a really hardcore left wing area like you're in? Do you feel like, obviously it's not going to be swinging right where you're at, but are you feeling enough kind of discontent that it's even percolating up into that area?
I see fear up here. I see fear. This is 100% Democratic where I am, but or 99%. By the way, the vaccination rate there's a big neighborhood. Piedmont is the wealthiest city in Alameda County. It's sort of within Oakland, but it's its own city. I looked at the vaccination rate, 99%. 99%.
Yeah.
I mean, and in Oakland and San Francisco, it's 85%. It's unbelievable. So yeah, the San Francisco Chronicle just yesterday had a headline saying, this was amazing to me because they're totally pro Newsom. It said, Newsom supporters are using fear to counter lack of enthusiasm for the governor.
Yeah.
So they see, and of course it's like white liberals, right? White college educated liberals going door to door in the ghetto, like near where I live, like, and telling them, the Larry Elders, he's a white supremacist. Actually, the Los Angeles Times announced 2 days ago, I think, that Larry Elder is a white supremacist. In a headline in the Los Angeles Times.
Right.
Larry Elder's a white supremacist. So that's desperation. That's fear. And so that tells me they might be losing their control. I hope so. Right. And I'm going to be voting as many times as I can in the recall.
That's the way. That's the California way, right?
I was going to say, because apparently that's fine for Democrats. They like when people vote multiple times, So I'm going to do that. I'm going to vote as many times as I can, Gavin.
And if it doesn't work, you can always come here to Florida, but you cannot bring your left-wing politics with you if you come here.
Don't you worry. I won't. And I can't wait. I've been wanting to move to Florida for about 1.5 years now. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So kind of as we land the plane here, I want to say, so I've always asked this on my show, but since you have a personal background growing up with leftists and liberals, and you're in the heart of that area, and you teach courses on the history of liberalism and leftism and all this stuff, how do we break bread and really start building solidarity with these liberals, instead of the left? Because I know the leftists, the dirtbag left and all that, they're open to talking and having an interesting conversation. But what about the mainstream liberals? How do we crack that nut and get them to start caring about liberty and not get into this public health tyranny? That's the thing I'm most concerned about them right now. We can work on them with the war stuff. They're very stupid about the war stuff right now, but I think we can work with them on that. But this public health tyranny thing, they've lost their minds. How do we get them back?
I don't think we can. And I think we need to stop trying to crack that nut. I just think we have to, I think the useful thing about the lockdowns and the masking is that we know now very clearly who we don't want to live with, right?
Yeah.
Do we want to live with those people in the same society as us?
No,
thank you. So we need to establish our own societies, and that can be within this society, which we can because of things like the internet and cryptocurrency. And that's what we need to be doing all the time. Anybody who thinks outside that box, like you and me and all the rest, and we have all sorts of different ideas, but right, you and I have all sorts of major differences, I'm sure, major differences, but like, we're not in that box. Some people have called it the cathedral, we need to build our own cathedrals. our own communities, and it can be loose networks online. It can be in-person, villages, communities, which I want to do all of at Renegade University. That's what we're doing as well. That are global, that are around the world, where, can have outlets in various places where you can go and visit and work and create and live, for a time, and through cryptocurrency. And that's the real game changer. Crypto, if it's all it's cracked up to be, and I think it is, that's what will allow us to do that, with autonomy, with sovereignty, with freedom from government control and regulation. So the future, it's looking, this is the darkest it's ever been in American politics in my lifetime, but nonetheless, the future is brighter than ever because of that.
What do you think about those 3 and 4-year-olds right now that have been wearing masks for 2 years of their life? Do you think that, I keep hoping that they're going to be the Luke Skywalker generation that comes back and says, screw this whole thing. We are going to take the Death Star down. We want our liberty back. I've been having to wear a mask on a playground for 20 years and I'm 20 years old and I'm ready to take this thing off. Or are they going to be broken in their spirit? Like a wild stallion broken, like a horse.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. And it breaks my heart. As you can imagine right here, I see children with masks on all the time. On playgrounds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds on playgrounds at school. And here's the thing that's really heartbreaking. It looks like a lot of them like it. And I think they like it because, again, I said it's the mark of a good person. So they've been taught that that's what a good person does. And I know that. We know that, right? So of course they're going to feel proud and good when they're wearing a mask. That's the most.
Teenagers like it, middle schoolers like it because they got identity issues with how they look, how their face looks, pimples, whatever.
That's right.
They can hide. If they got teeth that are crooked or whatever, they can just hide.
Yeah, but that is so heartbreaking. That's the most heartbreaking. That the kids, well, again, the youth of our country for the first time are the non-rebellious generation. Right now, this is the first time.
You talking about the Gen Z or the ones below?
Yeah, well, millennials too, like everybody under 40. But this is the first time in American history, right? Think about it. The first time in American history when the youth have been the non-rebellious generation. It's Gen Xers like me who are the rebellious ones, right? But the youth now, they love authority. They love authority.
That's what I'm saying. Do you believe in kind of like the generational pendulum swing, like the babies now are going to be rebelling against the authoritarian impulse of their millennial, parents or whatever?
I hope so.
Just like the 60s rebelled against their parents, right?
Exactly right. The 50s was noted for its repression, right? And the 60s was a rebellion against that. And we are noted. I don't think they know that they're being repressed yet, but they are. And so I hope you're right. That it has been the pattern historically, certainly in this country. So let's hope that that'll happen because frankly, I don't know how much longer I can live here.
Where else can you go? You mean California or America or?
Well, definitely California. I have grave reservations about continuing to live here, but even in the United States, although, I was in Arkansas and Texas a couple months ago and I felt free as hell. And it was just a wonderful experience. And I thought, I've always loved the South. I could
you like small town living and
yeah, I do now. I do now. Yeah. No, I lived in big city. I lived in all the big cities, San Francisco, LA, and New York my whole life. So I'm done. I'm ready for the.
Did you see yourself being a homesteader and wood chopper and
too much work, man? No, I'm all for it, but I don't want to do the work. I want other people to do that work.
You want to go to the local farmer's market, right?
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
Well, hey, man, I really appreciate you coming on the show and kind of giving us a little overview of your background with liberalism and ideas about why they're acting the way they are and how to. You don't think we should try to get them back over? Maybe. I'm probably more conservative than you. Why do I care more about working with them than you do?
Give up on them, man. Give up on them.
I'm concerned with their interventionist ways. Even if we had like secession states, they'd constantly want to be trying to like bomb us and stuff. They wouldn't leave us alone.
But you can't convince them to not do that, right? You can't convince. You've got to just get your own. I'm sorry to say, your own army. I mean, it's just a fight. It's a fight. If they're coming after us, they're not going to stop. Except by doing what the Viet Cong did. And
even though you got your jab, they're going to keep wanting you to have booster and booster and booster to get into the grocery store and restaurant. I mean, that's ridiculous. Can you imagine that? You're trying to get into the grocery. Sorry, you didn't get your monthly booster brought to you by Pfizer. It's like the Truman Show. It's like hell on earth. Who wants to live in that nightmare?
Pfizer. Right. That's the liberals are. Yeah. That's their hero.
And they've totally forgot that Pfizer has got a long history of criminal behavior. Our own government has prosecuted them. Nigeria, they were messing with Nigerian children with experimental drugs, killing them.
Right.
They were bribing off the Attorney General of Nigeria. I mean, that just happened. And they don't even, and the CNN reported it back in the day, but now they act like it never happened, you know?
I know. Well, I mean, everything I learned about Big Pharma being evil, I learned from who? The left. Like, come on. And now and now Big Pharma is Jesus to them, right?
Yeah.
Amazing.
It all goes back to the religion. The religious stuff never left.
Totally.
Well, totally. Hey, Thaddeus, really appreciate you coming on the show. Tell us again where we can keep up with your work and anything else you got going on.
Well, on Twitter, I'm Thaddeus at Thaddeus Russell. And then everyone should go to renegadeuniversity.com and you'll see all our courses and our in-person events and all the stuff we're doing there.
Well, thanks again for your time. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.